At my sister's wedding, I wasn't mentioned in the speech, the slideshow, or the family photo. When I asked why, her groom smirked and said, honestly, we didn't want background characters in our memories. I nodded, sat down at my table by the exit, and then quietly canceled the catering final payment. The main course never even made it to the tables. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the kind of person to destroy a wedding reception, but here we are. 3 months later, and I'm still processing what happened that night. Maybe writing this down will help me figure out if I'm the villain or if I finally stood up for myself. My sister and I weren't particularly close growing up, but we weren't enemies either. We had that typical sibling relationship where we'd fight over the TV remote and team up against our parents when needed. After college, we drifted apart naturally, different cities, different lives. But family is family, right? At least that's what I thought. When she got engaged last year, I was genuinely happy for her. Her fiancé seemed decent enough during the few times I'd met him at family gatherings. He worked in finance, drove a BMW, and had that polished look that screamed upper-middle-class success. My sister ate it up. She'd always been drawn to status and appearances, even as kids. The wedding planning process was intense. My sister turned into a different person, obsessive, demanding, treating everyone like hired help. She demanded specific colors for what we wore, critiqued our haircuts, and micromanaged every detail. I chalked it up to wedding stress and tried to be supportive. I offered to help with whatever she needed. I'm pretty good with technology, so I volunteered to handle the slideshow and some of the digital aspects. She declined, saying her future husband's brother was already taking care of it. Fine by me, less work. The bachelor party was my first real red flag. Her fiancé made several comments about family hierarchy and how some people were more important than others in their new life together. He talked about cutting dead weight and surrounding themselves only with people who added value. I assumed he was talking about old college friends or distant relatives. I never imagined he meant me. 3 weeks before the wedding, my sister asked if I could help with the catering payment. Their original plan fell through, and they needed someone with good credit to secure the new vendor. The total was $18,000, a significant chunk of money, but I had it. She promised to pay me back within a month after their honeymoon. I trusted her. She was family. The catering company required a 50% deposit up front and the remainder on the day of service. I paid the deposit immediately and arranged for the final payment to be processed the morning of the wedding. Everything seemed set. Wedding day arrived with perfect weather and beautiful decorations. The ceremony was lovely, though I noticed I wasn't included in the wedding party despite her having 6 bridesmaids, including college friends she barely spoke to anymore. I figured they wanted to keep numbers even or something. The reception started smoothly. Cocktail hour, dinner seating, the usual wedding timeline. I was seated at table 12, practically by the emergency exit, with some distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. My parents were at table 3, near the head table. Extended family filled the tables in between. The message was clear, but I tried not to read too much into it. Then came the speeches. The best man talked about childhood memories and college adventures. The maid of honor shared stories about girls' trips and late-night phone calls. My parents gave a touching speech about watching their daughter grow up and welcoming their new son-in-law to the family. I kept waiting for my turn. We'd discussed it weeks earlier. I was supposed to speak as her brother. But the DJ moved on to the slideshow without calling me up. I figured they were running behind schedule and would fit me in later. The slideshow was professionally done, set to romantic music with smooth transitions. Childhood photos, family vacations, college graduation, the proposal. I watched carefully, looking for the pictures I remembered being in. There were plenty of family shots, but in every single one, I'd been cropped out or they'd used versions where I wasn't present. Photos from Christmas morning where I was sitting right next to her, cropped to show just her opening gifts. The family vacation to Colorado where I'd literally taken half the pictures. They used the ones I'd taken of everyone else, none of the ones with me in them. Even recent photos from family dinners had been edited to remove me, or they'd selected angles where I wasn't visible. My stomach started churning. This couldn't be coincidental. Someone had deliberately gone through years of photos and systematically erased me from their love story. The slideshow ended to applause and tears. Then came time for family photos with the photographer. The usual combinations, bride and groom, both families together, each side separately, grandparents, siblings. Except when they called for siblings, only my sister's sister-in-law stepped forward. The photographer looked confused and asked if there were any other siblings. My sister glanced in my direction, then shook her head and said they could move on to the next grouping. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. My own sister had literally pretended I didn't exist for the family photos. I needed answers. I waited until after the formal photos were finished, then approached her during a quiet moment. I asked why I hadn't been included in the speech rotation, the slideshow, or the family photos? I tried to keep my voice calm and reasonable. She looked uncomfortable and glanced toward her new husband. He walked over with that confident stride of his, put his arm around her waist, and looked me directly in the eye. His expression was a mixture of condescension and barely concealed irritation, like I was interrupting something important. He told me that they'd made specific choices about their wedding memories. They wanted everything to be perfect, to reflect the life they were building together. He said they decided to focus on the people who would be central to their future, the ones who really mattered in their story. I asked what that meant exactly, though I was starting to understand. He smirked, actually smirked, and told me honestly, they didn't want background characters in their memories. He said some people were meant to be the stars of the story, and others were just part of the scenery. He suggested I should understand my role and be happy to support from the sidelines. The words hit me like a physical blow. Background character. In my own family. At my sister's wedding, where I'd helped pay for the food everyone was about to eat. My sister didn't say anything. She just stood there, avoiding eye contact, letting her husband speak for both of them. That hurt worse than his words. I nodded slowly, told them I understood perfectly, and walked back to my table by the exit. My mind was racing, but my decision was crystal clear. I pulled out my phone and opened the catering company's payment app. The final payment of $9,000 was scheduled to process in 2 hours, right before the main course service. I had full control over the timing and could cancel up until the last minute. I canceled the payment. Then I quietly slipped out through the exit door right next to my table. No dramatic speeches, no confrontations, no scene. I just left. I drove home, changed into comfortable clothes, and waited. My phone started ringing around 8:30. First my sister, then my parents, then various relatives. I didn't answer any of them. I knew exactly what was happening at the reception, and I felt a cold satisfaction imagining their faces when they realized what had occurred. Update 1. The next morning brought a flood of messages and missed calls. My parents were furious and demanded I explain myself immediately. My sister left a series of increasingly hysterical voicemails. Her new husband sent a text calling me pathetic and threatening legal action. I finally answered when my mother called for the 10th time. She was crying, asking how I could do such a thing to my own family. She said everyone was humiliated and that several relatives had left early when word spread about what happened. I told her to ask my sister why I did it. I explained about the speech, the slideshow, the photos, and exactly what her new son-in-law had said to me. I told her I was apparently just a background character, so I'd acted like one, quietly and invisibly. My mother went silent for a long moment. Then she asked if that was really what happened. I told her to ask anyone who was there. The conversation with her husband happened in front of multiple people. My father called later that day. He was calmer but still angry about the embarrassment. I told him the same story. He listened without interrupting, then asked why I'd helped pay for catering if I felt excluded. I explained that I'd offered to help before I knew I was being erased from their wedding narrative. I'd paid the deposit when I still thought I was family. But after being explicitly told I was a background character who didn't matter enough for their memories, I decided they could handle their perfect wedding without my background character money. He was quiet for a while. Then he admitted that he'd noticed the seating arrangement and wondered why I was so far from the family tables. He said he'd assumed it was just a space issue. Update 2. The fallout continued for weeks. My sister demanded I reimburse them for the catering disaster. She claimed I'd ruined her perfect day and destroyed their wedding memories. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd apparently become very central to their wedding memories after all. Her husband sent increasingly threatening messages about lawsuits and damages. He claimed I'd caused emotional distress and damaged their reputations. I forwarded all his messages to a lawyer friend who laughed and said they had no legal ground to stand on. Some relatives took their side, saying families should support each other regardless of hurt feelings. Others were more sympathetic once they heard the full story. A few admitted they'd noticed my absence from the formal elements and wondered about it. My cousin reached out to tell me that several people had asked about the missing main course. The official story was that there had been a kitchen emergency, but word eventually got out about what really happened. She said most people understood once they learned about the background character comment. The most surprising call came from my uncle, my mother's brother. He told me that while my method was dramatic, he respected that I'd finally stood up for myself. He said he'd watched my sister treat me as disposable for years and wondered when I'd reach my breaking point. 3 weeks after the wedding, my sister showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted and had clearly been crying. She said we needed to talk. She came inside and sat on my couch, fidgeting with her wedding ring. She told me she was sorry about how things went at the wedding. She said her husband had convinced her that a smaller, more intimate celebration would be more meaningful. I asked her if she really believed that, or if she was just repeating what he'd told her to say. She broke down then. She admitted that she'd felt pressure to create this perfect image of their new life together. Her husband had specific ideas about the kind of family he wanted to be associated with, and apparently, I didn't fit the image he had in mind. I asked her why his image mattered more than her actual brother. She couldn't answer that question. She cried and apologized, and said she missed our relationship. She begged me to understand that she'd been overwhelmed by wedding planning and hadn't thought clearly about how her decisions would affect me. I told her that I could forgive poor planning or thoughtless mistakes, but deliberately erasing me from every meaningful moment of her wedding wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A choice that showed me exactly how much our relationship meant to her. She promised things would be different going forward. She said her husband was just protective and would warm up to me once he got to know me better. I asked her if she'd hurt herself. She was asking me to earn acceptance from someone who'd already decided I was a background character in their life. I told her that wasn't how family was supposed to work. Update 3. 6 months have passed since the wedding disaster. My relationship with my sister remains complicated. She calls occasionally, usually when she's having problems with her husband. During these conversations, she hints that marriage isn't what she expected and that her husband can be controlling and dismissive. I listen, but don't offer much advice. I've learned that she's not ready to hear what I think about her situation. My parents have gradually come around to understanding my perspective. My mother admitted that she'd been so focused on wedding preparations that she hadn't noticed how I was being treated. My father apologized for not speaking up when he noticed the seating arrangement. The extended family has largely moved on, though holiday gatherings are still somewhat awkward. My sister and her husband usually attend separate events or leave early when I'm there. The most interesting development came from my sister's friends. 2 of her bridesmaids reached out to me separately. Both expressed concern about how controlling her husband had become and how isolated she seemed from her old support network. One of them told me that during the wedding planning, he'd made comments about which friends and family members were worthy of being included in their new life. Apparently, I wasn't the only one being evaluated and found lacking. This friend also revealed something I hadn't known. My sister had originally planned to include me in the slideshow and wanted me to give a speech. Her husband had convinced her to remove these elements because he felt they didn't align with the image they wanted to project. Learning this made me feel slightly better about my sister, but worse about her marriage. She hadn't initially planned to erase me. She'd been manipulated into it. I haven't shared this information with my parents or tried to intervene in my sister's marriage. She's an adult who made her choices, but I keep an eye on the situation from a distance. As for the catering money, I never got reimbursed and don't expect to be. I consider it the price of learning where I stood in my family's priorities. Expensive lesson, but valuable. Looking back, I don't regret what I did that night. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it dramatic? Definitely. But it was also effective. In one decisive action, I showed them exactly what happens when you treat family as disposable. I learned that standing up for yourself sometimes requires making people uncomfortable. For years, I'd accepted whatever treatment my family dished out because keeping peace seemed more important than demanding respect. But there's a difference between being flexible and being a doormat. When someone explicitly tells you that you're a background character in their life, you have 2 choices: accept that role or write yourself out of their story entirely. I chose to write myself out. And honestly, I sleep better at night knowing I finally drew a line in the sand. The wedding disaster became a catalyst for me to examine all my relationships more carefully. I started setting boundaries with people who took me for granted and investing more energy in relationships that were reciprocal and respectful. My social life improved dramatically once I stopped chasing approval from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth their time. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Sometimes the only way to get people's attention is to remove something they're taking for granted. In this case, that something was my financial support and unconditional availability. My sister learned that background characters can sometimes become very central to the plot when they decide to stop playing their assigned role. And her husband learned that treating people as disposable can backfire spectacularly when those people have something you need. The whole experience taught me that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about mutual respect, consideration, and genuine care for each other's feelings. When those elements are missing, the biological connection becomes meaningless. I'm still open to rebuilding my relationship with my sister if she ever decides to prioritize our family bond over her husband's image management. But I'll never again accept being treated as a background character in anyone's story. Because here's what I learned that night. Sometimes the background characters have more power than anyone realizes. And when they decide they've had enough, they can bring the whole show to a halt. The main course never made it to the tables, but I finally got the respect I'd been missing for years. Fair trade, if you ask me.